of the Opposition.
Met with the Chinese president and said he, quote, his office said he, quote, raised our serious concerns about interference activities in Canada. Was the Prime Minister ever briefed about any of these, and I quote, interference activities that he says, that the Prime Minister says went on in Canada?
Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I am regularly briefed by intelligence officials and security experts on threats to Canada and to Canadians, whether it be cyber threats, whether it be interference with Canadian diaspora communities, whether it be use of online misinformation or disinformation. There are a range of threats out there that Canadians and Canadian security agencies continue to be vigilant against. We will always be there to protect Canadians.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
What specific interference was the Prime Minister referring to when he raised his serious concerns about interference with the Chinese president?
Honourable Prime Minister. We've known for many years that there are consistent engagements by representatives of the Chinese government into Canadian communities with local media, reports of illicit Chinese police stations. These are all things that we continue to be concerned about, that our officials stay active on, and that we will continue to be vigilant around to keep Canadians safe.
When we ask about the Prime Minister about interference in the 2019 election, he blusters and compares us to Donald Trump, who's denying the result of the American presidential election. There's one person who spoke about the federal election in 2019, and it was the guy who won it. Chinese interference is very serious. To avoid it happening again, we need to know. He's got to stop posturing and tell us which candidates were funded by China, and above all, how did that happen? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the integrity of our elections were not compromised. In January 2019, we set up a nonpartisan committee to assess threats to electoral integrity, and it was clearly established that the integrity of our elections had not been compromised in 2019 or in 2021. The Director of Elections said yesterday that nothing leads him to believe that there was any interference in terms of having a free and fair election. Instead of creating false concerns for Canadians, we want to reassure everyone about the integrity of our system. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. The Prime Minister is hard to follow with Chinese interference. On the one hand, he doesn't think it's important enough to respond seriously to the opposition, but at the G20, he was running around after the Chinese President Xi Jinping to talk about it. Here, he doesn't know anything about it, but at the G20, he was aware enough to go and discuss it with the Chinese president. So the question is, does he know all the details about Chinese interference and is hiding it from us? Or did he approach Xi Jinping solely based on a newspaper article? Either it's not honest or it's not smart. Where's the Prime Minister standing on this? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the member from the Bloc Québécois is just saying whatever he wants. We know that it's important to protect Canadians from interference that exists from different countries. We know that full well. However, at the same time, we can confirm that in every briefing that I have had when it comes to security, our intelligence experts, and those who were monitoring our elections, we can confirm that the integrity of our elections was never called into question.
The allegations in the Globe story are false. That was what the Prime Minister's response to the Globe report, that he interfered in the criminal prosecution of SNC-Lavalin. I do not have any information, nor have I been briefed on any federal candidates receiving any money from China. That was the Prime Minister's response to the Global News report. The Prime Minister sows doubt when these kinds of reports are published. The best way to protect the integrity of a democracy is transparency. So when will the Prime Minister be transparent about all the facts concerning the 2019 election funding of candidates?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. In all the extensive security briefings I have received, there has never been any information on federal candidates receiving money from China. We established a nonpartisan panel to evaluate any threats of election interference in January 2019, and they were clear that the integrity of our elections was not compromised in either 2019 or 2021. And the Chief Electoral Officer just said yesterday that there is no reason to believe that it was not a free and fair election. Mr. Speaker, Canadians can be reassured that our election integrity held.
The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Speaker, after 2 weeks of suspicious silence, the Prime Minister now suddenly claims that he was never briefed about candidates receiving money from Beijing. Yet Global News is reporting that last January, the Prime Minister received intelligence memos that Beijing's Toronto consulate directed the funneling of a large sum of money to 11 candidates in the 2019 election. So, did the Prime Minister receive those intelligence memos, yes or no?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Third time today, Mr. Speaker. In all the extensive security briefings I get, there was never any information given to me on candidates receiving money from China. So, no, Mr. Speaker. The reality is the integrity of our elections was not compromised. And people don't have to take my word for it. They can look at the independent panel we appointed to look at just that, or the elections officer, Canada Elections Officer, who just said yesterday that they were not compromised, our elections.
L'honorable député de Mégantic-Lérable.
Le directeur général des élections a aussi dit hier.
The Chief Electoral Officer also said yesterday that it's not his role to investigate and follow up on complaints. Liberal MPs Logan Charlebois, Ottawa West Nepean, Whitby, Pickering, Uxbridge, who voted for the Conservative motion to investigate the allegations presented in the news on November 7th regarding the briefing that the Prime Minister would have received in January. Who's telling the truth here? Because from the beginning, since we've been listening to the Prime Minister, we really don't know what to believe or who to believe. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, the Chief Electoral Officer confirmed that nothing led him to believe that the last election was not free or fair. However, it's also true that it's not his job to investigate that. The nonpartisan committee that was created in 2019 to assess threats and interference in our democracy clearly established that the integrity of our elections had not been compromised in 2019 or 2021. And that is why I asked experts in intelligence and security to testify before committee and share all the information they could regarding elections. Mr. Speaker, let's move on to solutions. 11 candidates received funding from China during the 2019 elections. It proves that we must fight against foreign interference in our democracy. And that's a good thing, because in this case, it's super easy. We just need to come back to public funding of political parties. We need to have Elections Canada fund parties based on the number of votes they receive instead of relying on large donors. We could do that tomorrow morning. Does the Prime Minister realize that as foreign interference increases, public funding is becoming essential? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, obviously, it's very important for all Canadians for our elections to not be compromised and maintain their integrity. That's why Canadians can be reassured by what the Director of Elections said yesterday, which was that nothing led him to believe that there was anything to undermine our free and fair election. In January 2019, we set up a nonpartisan committee to assess threats of interference in our elections, and that committee clearly established that the integrity of our elections had not been compromised in 2019 or in 2021. Canadians can maintain their trust. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. This is complicated. We can't resolve all misinformation campaigns on social media, for example, just by waving a magic wand. But illegal election financing could be eliminated tomorrow morning. We already knew that the dependence of political parties on private contributions made them vulnerable to influence by large donors. We now know that with Chinese interference in 2019, we have exactly the same problem with foreign powers. So let's kill two birds with one stone. Will the Prime Minister restore public funding for political parties? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the member on the other side is talking about interference in the 2019 elections as though it were a fact. However, Canadians should not listen too closely because the General Director of Elections said that nothing led us to believe that the elections were not free or fair. Our nonpartisan committee assessed threats of interference in our elections and determined that the integrity of our elections was maintained in 2019 and in 2021. So let's not scare Canadians for nothing. Our institutions are strong.